There he is, officer. That's the man who broke into my house. Arrest him! The voice, a shrill and panicked shriek, cut through the quiet suburban air. I just stood there, my suitcase handle clenched in my fist, staring at the flashing red and blue lights, painting stripes across the pristine facade of my own home. I'm a cybersecurity consultant, and I'd just returned 2 weeks early from a major project in Tokyo. The woman pointing at me from my front porch, a woman I recognized as Barbara, our overzealous HOA president, had apparently moved in while I was gone. She was wearing my late wife's silk bathrobe. The absurdity of it was staggering. She called the cops on me for trespassing on my own property, while she was the one living there. But little did she know, my early return wasn't a coincidence, and my phone, which I was holding up, wasn't just for taking vacation photos. She had just walked into the most elaborate, technologically documented trap of her life. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because I promise you, the story of how this HOA Karen got herself arrested for felony burglary in front of the entire neighborhood is absolutely insane. It all started 6 months earlier when I bought what I considered my dream home. After years of grinding, living in cramped city apartments while building my consultancy, I finally had the means to purchase a piece of tranquility. It was a large modern structure of glass and steel, nestled in a wealthy oak-lined subdivision that promised peace and quiet, the kind of place with more lawn care services per capita than a professional golf course. I travel constantly for work. My clients are international corporations with complex digital security needs, so my home was my sanctuary, my fortress of solitude, the one fly in the ointment. The one I hadn't properly accounted for was the Homeowners Association and its president, Barbara Cleaney. My first encounter with Barbara was less than a week after I moved in. She appeared on my doorstep, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy tablet. She was a woman in her late 50s who tried desperately to look 40. With unnaturally blonde hair pulled into a severe ponytail and a wardrobe of expensive but slightly ill-fitting resort wear, she drove a 10-year-old Mercedes sedan that she kept immaculately polished. A perfect metaphor for her entire existence. Projecting a status she didn't quite have, she informed me, with a smile that never reached her cold eyes, that my choice of mailbox, a sleek, minimalist black steel design that matched the house, was non-compliant. The approved model was a faux colonial monstrosity in forest green. The fine was $50 per day. I tried to be reasonable. I explained that the mailbox was part of the home's architectural design, but it was like talking to a brick wall, a very condescending brick wall. The rules are the rules for a reason, she'd chirped. They maintain the aesthetic integrity of our community. I looked from her faux colonial-loving face to my hyper-modern glass house and wondered what aesthetic she was talking about. To avoid a protracted battle while I was still unpacking, I relented and bought the ugly green mailbox. It was a mistake. It showed her I would yield. The violations that followed were a cascade of pettiness. My garbage bins were visible from the street for exactly 45 minutes past the designated morning pickup time. A small ornamental Japanese maple I planted was not on the pre-approved list of flora. I received a warning because a package was left on my porch for more than 3 hours. An eyesore. According to the letter, she slid into my non-compliant-turned-compliant mailbox. Each infraction came with a smugly written notice and the threat of a fine. It was suburban warfare by 1,000 paper cuts. My next-door neighbor, a retired engineering professor named Arthur, caught me one afternoon as I was sullenly measuring the height of my lawn with a ruler. He chuckled. "Getting the Barbara treatment." "I see," he said, leaning on his fence. "Don't let her get to you. She's been running this HOA like her own personal fiefdom for a decade. She lives in one of the original smaller ranch houses at the entrance, and I think she's pathologically jealous of anyone who moves into one of the newer, bigger places." He told me she'd once tried to fine a family because their visiting grandchild's birthday party had excessive balloonage. This was the woman who held sway over our slice of suburbia. Then came the big one, a lucrative, high-stakes contract in Tokyo that would require me to be overseas for a full month. It was a major opportunity, and I couldn't pass it up. As a courtesy, and because the HOA bylaws demanded it for any absence longer than 2 weeks, I sent a formal email to the board notifying them of my travel dates. I specified I would be leaving on May 1st and returning on June 1st. I set my home's state-of-the-art security system, a network of my own design that went far beyond simple motion detectors. It was my profession, after all. Every door, every window was censored. Internal and external cameras were positioned for total coverage. The smart home system logged every single interaction, from the thermostat to the refrigerator. It was less of a security system and more of a digital ghost that watched over the house. The first week in Tokyo was a blur of meetings and presentations. It wasn't until the second week that I noticed the anomalies. I'm a man who thrives on data, on patterns, and the patterns in my home's data logs were wrong. A tiny alert I had programmed for myself popped up. The thermostat in the master bedroom had been manually adjusted from its energy-saving away mode of 65 degrees Celsius to a very comfortable 72 degrees. I brushed it off as a glitch. Then, 2 days later, another alert. The smart fridge, which logs its inventory via weight sensors on the shelves, registered the addition of a gallon of 2% milk, a brand of yogurt I never buy, and a bottle of cheap Chardonnay. My blood ran cold. I don't drink cheap Chardonnay. I pulled up the live feed from my home's media server. Someone had accessed my Plex account the night before and watched 3 hours of a reality TV show about rich housewives. This was not a glitch. This was an intrusion. With a growing sense of dread, I navigated through my secure portal and accessed the internal camera feeds. My heart hammered against my ribs. There, on my living room couch, were Barbara and her meek, balding husband, Gary. She was wearing one of my expensive cashmere throws over her shoulders, sipping from one of my crystal wine glasses. Gary was channel surfing with my remote control. They were watching my 85-inch television, their shoes off, feet propped up on my ottoman. It was surreal. They weren't robbing me. They were living in my house. My mind raced, trying to process the sheer audacity. The HOA had a bylaw requiring homeowners to provide a key for emergency access. It was a contentious rule I had fought, arguing it was a security risk. But I was outvoted. Barbara, as president, was the keeper of these keys. She must have let herself in under some fabricated emergency and, upon finding the place empty, decided to upgrade her lifestyle for a month. She saw my email. She knew my return date. She thought she had a clear runway. A white-hot wave of rage washed over me. I wanted to call the police right then and there. I wanted them to kick down my own door and drag her out. But then the professional in me took over. The cold, methodical strategist that my clients paid a small fortune for. It would be my word against hers. She was the HOA president. I was an absentee homeowner. She could claim she was there for an inspection, that there was a water leak. Any number of lies. I needed more than just a picture. I needed a case. I needed irrefutable, crushing, undeniable proof. I leaned back in my Tokyo hotel chair, thousands of miles away, and began to plan. She thought she was having a secret vacation. She had no idea she had just become the star of her own very private reality show. And I was the executive producer. The rage simmering in my chest was a powerful motivator. But I forced it down, channeling it into cold, calculated focus. This wasn't a simple case of trespassing. It was a profound violation. This woman hadn't just entered my home. She had usurped my life, wrapping herself in the comfort and security I had worked so hard to build. Calling the local police from Tokyo would create a chaotic mess of international calls and conflicting stories. Barbara would undoubtedly spin a tale of performing her sacred HOA duties, fabricating an emergency that required her presence. She would be calm, authoritative, and believable to officers on the scene I, on the other hand, would be a frantic voice on a bad connection from halfway around the world. No, a direct confrontation wasn't the right opening move. This was a chess game, and she had just made a phenomenally stupid, arrogant move. My response had to be devastating. My fortress of solitude was now my laboratory. For the next week, I became a digital ghost. Haunting my own house from my laptop, I spent every spare moment outside of my work meetings meticulously gathering a mountain of evidence. I set up dedicated folders on my encrypted hard drive, labeling them with forensic precision: video, audio, data logs, subject profiles. I downloaded every second of footage from all 16 of my high-definition cameras. The quality was pristine, the angles comprehensive. I had crystal-clear video of Barbara and Gary eating my food at my dining table. I watched them sleep in my bed, their heads on my pillows. I saw Barbara wander into my home office, running her hands over my leather chair as if testing it out for size. The most infuriating footage came from the master closet. She had a walk-in closet in her own home, I was sure, but mine was a custom-built room with cedar lining and specialized lighting. I had footage of her trying on my deceased wife Eleanor's clothing. Eleanor had passed away 2 years prior, and I had kept her things, unable to part with them yet. Seeing this vulgar, entitled woman draping Eleanor's favorite scarf over her shoulders, preening in the mirror, sent a jolt of pure fury through me. It transformed the mission from a matter of principle into something deeply personal. But I couldn't let emotion cloud my process. I documented everything. The data logs from my smart home system were a gold mine, creating a minute-by-minute timeline of their occupation. I logged every time they used the Sonos system, creating a playlist of their terrible musical taste, mostly cheesy 80s soft rock. I had a log from the smart toilet in the master bath, a ridiculous splurge, I admit, that recorded every use. I noted the drop in weight of the premium coffee beans in my automated espresso machine and the corresponding increase in the machine's water consumption. I created a spreadsheet cross-referencing the power consumption of the guest bedrooms against their vacancy, proving they had hosted guests. On one occasion, I watched in silent rage as they entertained another couple on my back patio, serving them my best single malt scotch and boasting about the perks of being on the HOA board. They were treating my home like a free luxury hotel and social club. The key, I knew, would be to prove intent. I needed to show that Barbara knew she was there illegally and had a plan to conceal her presence. This is where modern technology gave me an almost unfair advantage. Many of my internal security cameras had microphones, which I had legally installed for security purposes. My state's laws operated on one-party consent for recording conversations. And since I was a party to the surveillance of my own home, I could legally record them. I remotely activated the audio on the camera in my home office. The room where Barbara seemed to spend an inordinate amount of time. I hit pay dirt almost immediately. I recorded a phone conversation she had with a friend, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Oh, it's fabulous, Marge," she crowed. "The owner is some rich tech nerd who's off in Asia for a month. The house is just sitting here empty. The least I can do is make sure everything is operational." She laughed, a sound like grinding gravel. "Gary is in heaven with the 85-inch TV. We'll be sad to go back to our little shoebox next to the main road." The smoking gun, the piece of evidence that would utterly annihilate any defense she could dream up, came 2 days later. I was listening in live, my heart pounding, as she and Gary had an argument in the kitchen. Gary, who always seemed to be walking on eggshells around her, sounded nervous. "Barb, are you sure about this? What if he comes back early?" he whined. And then Barbara delivered the line that sealed her fate, her voice sharp and dismissive. "He won't. I have his itinerary. He's not due back until the 1st. He's a creature of habit. We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here. Now stop worrying and pass me that expensive olive oil. I saved the audio file, labeled it Exhibit A, Mens Rea, and backed it up on 3 different secure servers. It was done. I had her. Her lying, her scheming, her intent, her admission, all in broadcast-quality audio. It was time to contact my lawyer. I sent a heavily encrypted email to David Chen, a sharp, no-nonsense litigator I'd worked with before. The subject line was Urgent, Highly Unusual Matter. I attached a single low-resolution still image of Barbara on my couch and a short password-protected audio clip of her "he'll never know" conversation. His reply came within the hour. Call me now. When I got him on a secure line, his initial reaction was stunned silence, followed by a low whistle. "Frank," he said, "in 20 years of practicing law, I have seen some truly brazen things, but this is a masterpiece of idiotic entitlement." He wasn't just my lawyer anymore. He was a very enthusiastic partner in the coming operation. We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy. It was a 2-pronged attack. First, the criminal complaint, and second, the civil action and the complete dismantling of her HOA power base. The key was the landing. I wouldn't be returning on June 1st. I would be returning on May 15th. We would let her get comfortable, cocky, absolutely certain her little vacation was foolproof. And then I would simply come home. The early return, David argued, was critical. It would catch her completely off guard and force her to react erratically. Hopefully, in front of witnesses, it would remove any possibility of her claiming she was there to prepare for my return. We synchronized our watches, so to speak. I booked my flight. David arranged his schedule to be available at a moment's notice. The trap was set. All I had to do was fly 12 hours, walk through my front door, and watch the curtain fall on Barbara's suburban fantasy. The 12-hour flight from Tokyo to the States felt like the longest journey of my life. It wasn't fatigue from the time difference. It was a thrumming, coiled anticipation. I spent the hours going over the plan with David one last time via the plane's spotty Wi-Fi, reviewing the evidence I had meticulously organized. It was a digital tapestry of Barbara's arrogance. Every photo, every log file, every audio clip was a nail for her legal coffin. David's final message before I landed was simple. Let her make the first move. Let her call the cops. Her own outrage will be her undoing. Be calm. Be factual. And let me handle the legal. I landed at the international airport, breezed through customs with my global entry, and instead of heading to the usual limo service stand, I hailed a simple yellow cab. I didn't want my usual driver, who would have driven right up to the house. I needed to make my approach on foot. I had the cab drop me off 2 blocks from my street, at the entrance to the subdivision, right past Barbara's smaller, comparatively modest home. I saw her pristine Mercedes in her driveway and felt a grim smile touch my lips. She was definitely not at her own house. I pulled out my wheeled suitcase, adjusted my jacket, and began the slow walk toward my mansion. It was a perfect sunny afternoon. Birds were chirping, sprinklers were hissing on manicured lawns. It was the picture of suburban peace, a peace I was about to shatter. As I rounded the final corner, my house came into view, and there she was. Barbara, lounging on one of my expensive chaise lounges on the front porch, wearing what I now recognized as one of Eleanor's silk kimonos over her clothes, a book in her lap. Sipping from a wine glass, she looked completely at home, the self-appointed queen of the castle. I kept my phone in my hand, discreetly recording, just as David had advised. I walked at a steady, unhurried pace up the long, curving driveway. Barbara didn't notice me at first, too absorbed in her book and her wine. But as I got closer, her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. For a split second, I saw confusion, then recognition, then panic flash across her face. She leapt to her feet, the wine glass clattering to the porch floor, spilling cheap Chardonnay across the teak decking. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shrill, as if I were the intruder. I didn't respond immediately. I let the moment hang, my expression calm, my phone still recording. Neighbors were starting to peer out of their windows, drawn by the commotion. "Perfect, Barbara," I said evenly. "This is my house. I live here. Why are you here?" Her face flushed red, and she launched into a frantic, improvised defense. "I am the HOA president. There was a reported water leak. I had to check the property. It's my duty." Her voice was climbing higher, and I could see her hands shaking as she clutched the kimono tighter around herself. I raised an eyebrow, my voice still calm. "A water leak? For 2 weeks? While you're wearing my late wife's kimono and drinking wine on my porch?" I held up my phone, making sure she saw the red recording indicator. "I've got footage of you and Gary living here. Barbara, eating my food, sleeping in my bed, using my TV. Shall I go on?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She was unraveling, and the neighbors were now stepping onto their lawns, openly watching. I heard a murmur from the house next door. Arthur, the retired professor, was already on his phone, no doubt calling other neighbors to witness the spectacle. "You're trespassing!" she shrieked, doubling down. "I'm calling the police!" She fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. I just stood there, suitcase at my side, letting her dig her own grave. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steady. "Call them. I'm curious to hear how you explain this." She dialed 911, her voice a mix of panic and indignation as she spoke to the dispatcher. "There's a man breaking into my house. He's threatening me. Send someone immediately." She gave my address, and hung up, glaring at me with a mix of fear and defiance. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up, their lights flashing. Officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts, assessing the scene. Barbara rushed toward them, pointing at me. "That's him! He's trying to break in! Arrest him!" The lead officer, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked from Barbara to me. "Sir, can you identify yourself?" he asked. "Frank Mercer," I said, pulling my driver's license from my wallet and handing it over. "This is my home. I own it. I just returned from a business trip in Tokyo. This woman, Barbara Clean, has been illegally living here while I was gone." Barbara's face went pale, but she kept up her act. "That's nonsense. I'm the HOA president. I was checking the property for a maintenance issue." "He's lying!" The officer raised a hand, silencing her. "Ma'am, calm down, sir. Do you have proof of ownership?" I nodded, pulling out my phone and opening the secure app where I'd stored digital copies of my deed. Mortgage documents and utility bills, all clearly showing my name and this address. I handed the phone to the officer, who scrolled through the documents, his expression neutral but attentive. "And you say she's been living here?" he asked, glancing at Barbara, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool afternoon air. "Yes," I said. "I have video footage, audio recordings, and smart home data logs showing her and her husband occupying my house for the past 2 weeks. They've been using my belongings, hosting guests, and even wearing my late wife's clothing. I can provide all of it right now." The officer's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Barbara. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation to support your claim that you were here for maintenance?" Barbara stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. I don't have it on me, but as HOA president, I have the right to access properties for emergencies. It's in the bylaws. The second officer, a younger woman, chimed in, Ma'am, accessing a property for an emergency doesn't mean moving in and using the owner's belongings. Do you have a key to this house? Barbara hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but it's for HOA purposes. I was just… Ma'am, the lead officer interrupted, his tone firm. I'm going to need you to step aside while we verify this. I opened my secure portal on my phone and played the audio clip of Barbara's kitchen conversation with Gary. He won't. I have his itinerary. He's not due back until the 1st. He'll never even know we were here. The officers listened in silence, their expressions hardening. Barbara's face crumpled, her hands clutching the kimono as if it could shield her from the truth. That's enough, the lead officer said, turning to Barbara. Ma'am, you're under arrest for felony burglary and trespassing. He began reading her Miranda rights as the second officer gently but firmly took her arm. Guiding her toward the cruiser, Barbara's protests grew incoherent, a mix of sobs and frantic excuses. But the officers were unmoved. Gary appeared at the door, looking bewildered, still holding my remote control. What's going on? He asked, his voice trembling. The second officer approached him. Sir, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. You're also implicated in the unauthorized occupation of this property. As Barbara was led to the cruiser, handcuffed and still wearing Eleanor's kimono, the neighbors were now fully assembled. A crowd of at least 20 people watching from their lawns and driveways. Arthur, my neighbor, gave me a subtle nod, his phone still out, recording the scene. I knew he'd been waiting for years to see Barbara's reign of terror come to an end. I turned to the lead officer. I have a full evidence package, video, audio, data logs, ready to send to your department. My lawyer, David Chen, is on standby to provide legal support and file the necessary complaints. The officer nodded, impressed. That's the most thorough evidence I've ever seen in a case like this. Send it to the station, and we'll take it from there. As the cruisers pulled away with Barbara and Gary, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers and shocked laughter. I overheard one neighbor say to another, She had it coming. She's been lording over us for years. Another added, Did you see her in his wife's robe? Unbelievable. I walked into my house, the familiar scent of cedar and leather marred by the lingering trace of Barbara's perfume. The evidence package I sent to the police that evening was a masterclass in digital forensics. 16 hours of video, 47 audio clips, 12 spreadsheets of smart home data, and a detailed timeline of their occupation. David filed the criminal complaint for felony burglary, trespassing, and theft, and a civil lawsuit for emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and damages to my property. He estimated the civil suit alone could cost Barbara and Gary upwards of $200,000. Not to mention the criminal penalties, the fallout was swift and brutal. Barbara was charged with felony burglary, a charge that carried up to 7 years in prison due to the intentional and prolonged nature of her intrusion. Gary faced lesser charges as an accessory, but was released on bail with a plea deal that required him to testify against his wife. The HOA board held an emergency meeting the next day, and Barbara was stripped of her presidency. Arthur, who had long been her reluctant vice president, took over and immediately proposed amending the emergency access key rule, which passed unanimously. The neighborhood newsletter, usually a dry recounting of lawn care schedules, became a sensation. An anonymous resident, Arthur swore it wasn't him, leaked details of Barbara's arrest, complete with stills from my security footage. The story went viral in our small community, shared across local social media groups with captions like HOA tyrant taken down and Karma comes for Karen. Barbara and Gary put their house up for sale within a week, but no one was surprised when it sat on the market for months. Nobody wanted to buy the former palace of the neighborhood's most hated couple. I spent the next few days cleaning my house, reclaiming every inch of my sanctuary. I donated Eleanor's clothing to a women's shelter, keeping only her favorite scarf, which I had professionally cleaned to remove any trace of Barbara. The ugly green mailbox was replaced with my original sleek design, and the HOA board, under Arthur's leadership, approved it without a peep. David called me a week later with an update. "Frank, you're a legend," he said, laughing. "The prosecutor says this is the most airtight case they've ever seen. Barbara's lawyer is begging for a plea deal, but with your evidence, she's got no leverage. Oh, and the civil suit? They're offering to settle for $250,000 to avoid court. What do you want to do?" "Push for the max," I said, "and donate the settlement to military widows' charities in Eleanor's name." It felt right. Barbara had violated more than my home. She'd disrespected Eleanor's memory. This was my way of honoring her. The story didn't end with Barbara's downfall. The neighborhood changed. The HOA became a cooperative, reasonable entity under Arthur's leadership, focused on community rather than control. Neighbors started talking to each other again, sharing stories of Barbara's past tyranny over barbecues and block parties. My house, once just a sanctuary, became a symbol of standing up to petty tyrants, and I, the rich tech nerd, as Barbara had called me, became the guy who took down the HOA queen with nothing but a smartphone and a plan. As for Barbara, she took the plea deal: 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, and a permanent ban from any HOA leadership role. Gary divorced her quietly and moved to another state. The last I heard, Barbara was working at a low-end retail job, a far cry from her days of sipping stolen wine on my porch. My phone, that unassuming little device, had been my greatest weapon. It reminded me of a lesson I teach my clients. In the digital age, data is power. Barbara thought she could outsmart me, but she didn't realize she was playing chess against a grandmaster in a house wired to catch every move. So, tell me in the comments, what's the craziest thing your HOA has ever done? And if you enjoyed this story, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear about the time a Karen got exactly what she deserved. For a moment, Barbara didn't see me. She was lost in her own delusion of grandeur, lounging on my porch in my late wife's silk kimono, sipping wine like she owned the place. Then she glanced up. The sequence of emotions that flashed across her face was a sight to behold. First, confusion. Who was this man walking so purposefully toward her porch? Then a flicker of dawning recognition, quickly followed by pure, undiluted panic. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her cheeks. The wine glass trembled in her hand. For a split second, I saw the terror of being caught, but it was just a flash, immediately subsumed by a wave of righteous indignation. Her posture straightened, her fear morphing into aggression. This was her fatal flaw, the arrogance Arthur had warned me about, the very trait David and I were counting on. She stood up, placing the wine glass down with a sharp click. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice tight. "This is private property." I stopped at the foot of the porch steps, placing my suitcase down calmly. "Hello, Barbara," I said, my voice even. "I live here." The blood rushed back into her face, turning it a blotchy red. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "The owner isn't due back for 2 weeks." It was a beautiful, unintentional confession. She knew the timeline. She had been tracking it. Before I could respond, she lunged for the offensive, whipping out her phone. "You're a trespasser. I'm calling the police," she shrieked, her voice echoing across the manicured lawns. Neighbors started peeking out their windows. This was it, the moment of truth. I just stood there, impassive, and let her do it. 911, what's your emergency?" I could hear the operator's voice from her phone. "Yes, hello. My name is Barbara Clean. I'm the HOA president at 1120 Cypress Lane. There's a man here. He's trying to break in. He's threatening me. Please, you have to send someone right away." She was a surprisingly good actress, her voice filled with manufactured terror, painting a picture of a dangerous intruder harassing a lone woman. I didn't say a word. I let her dig her own hole within minutes. The serene afternoon was torn apart by the wail of sirens. Two police cruisers screamed around the corner and pulled into my driveway, lights flashing, bathing the scene in strobes of red and blue. Arthur appeared on his lawn next door, exactly as I'd hoped. Watching with a concerned but knowing expression, two officers got out. A younger, eager-looking cop, I later learned, was Officer Reed, and an older, more seasoned sergeant with a calm, weathered face named Miller. They took positions, their hands near their holsters. "Assessing the scene, ma'am, sir. What's going on here?" Sergeant Miller asked, his voice a calm beacon in Barbara's storm of hysterics. Barbara pointed a trembling finger at me. "That man, officer, he's a trespasser. He came onto my property and refused to leave. I think he was trying to rob me. Arrest him." The younger officer, Reed, took a step toward me, his hand on his weapon. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." I slowly raised my hands, my phone still clutched in one of them. "Officers," I said, my voice steady and low, a stark contrast to Barbara's screeching. "There seems to be a grave misunderstanding." "This is my house." Barbara let out a derisive snort. "He's lying. I'm the HOA president. I'm responsible for this property, while the owner is out of the country. This man is a danger to the community." This was her playing her trump card, her title, the flimsy shield of authority she hid behind. It was exactly what I wanted. She had publicly, in front of law enforcement, declared herself the responsible party for the property. She had woven her own net, and now it was time for me to pull it tight. Sergeant Miller held up a hand to quiet Barbara, his expression one of professional patience. His eyes, honed by years on the force, scanned from her frantic, overdramatic posture to my calm, stationary one. It was clear he was assessing credibility, and Barbara's screeching performance wasn't helping her case. "Okay, let's all just take a breath," he said, his gaze settling on me. "Sir, can you provide me with some identification?" "Of course, officer," I replied. "It's in the inside pocket of my jacket. May I have your permission to slowly reach for it?" He nodded. I deliberately and methodically retrieved my wallet, extracted my driver's license, and handed it to him. He examined it, his eyes flicking from the photo to my face, then down to the address printed below my name. 1120 Cypress Lane. This was the first domino. A small, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his posture. He looked over at Barbara. "Ma'am, the address on his license matches this house. Barbara," cornered by a simple fact, became even more frantic. "So what? That proves nothing." He could have found it, stolen it. People forge documents all the time. I'm telling you, as the president of this homeowners association, this man is not the owner. She was staking her entire identity on her title, believing it granted her an unimpeachable authority that superseded actual evidence. It was a pathetic, desperate gamble. "Officers," I said, breaking the tense silence, "I can definitively prove my ownership in about 3 seconds if you'll allow me to approach my front door." Sergeant Miller exchanged a quick glance with Officer Reed, then nodded. "Go ahead." Slowly, I walked past Barbara, who watched me with a look of pure venom, and up the 3 steps to my front door. The door was equipped with a state-of-the-art biometric lock. I placed my right thumb on the small, glowing glass panel. There was a soft electronic chime, a click of the deadbolt retracting, and the heavy door swung open an inch. The silence that followed was deafening. The visual was irrefutable. You can't forge a fingerprint on the spot. I turned back to the officers. Barbara was frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. She looked like a statue commemorating the exact moment of a colossal miscalculation. I let the moment hang in the air for a few seconds before continuing. "Furthermore," I said, my voice resonating with cold clarity, "while I can certainly prove who I am, I also have incontrovertible evidence of who has been illegally residing in my home, consuming my property and using my belongings for the past 17 days, as if on cue. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. David Chen got out, looking sharp and composed in a dark suit. Carrying a leather briefcase, he walked toward us with an air of purpose. The arrival of a lawyer dramatically changed the temperature of the entire encounter. "Sergeant Miller," David said, extending a hand which the sergeant shook. "My name is David Chen. I am Mr. Mercer's legal counsel." He then turned his head slightly to acknowledge Barbara. "Officers, my client is the sole legal owner of this property. He has just returned from an international business trip, which was supposed to conclude on June 1st. David paused, letting that sink in. "We have reason to believe that this woman, Mrs. Clean, has been using his absence to illegally occupy his residence. We're not talking about a simple misunderstanding or a brief wellness check. We're talking about a full-on 2.5-week stay," Barbara sputtered, finding her voice again. "That's a lie. I was performing daily inspections. There were reports of a plumbing issue." It was a weak, flimsy excuse, and it evaporated in the face of David's next statement. "Daily inspections that involved sleeping in my client's bed, wearing his late wife's clothing, drinking his liquor, and hosting dinner parties?" David asked, his voice laced with ice. He opened his briefcase. "We have an extensive, time-stamped digital record of Mrs. Clean's entire stay, including hours of high-definition video and audio recordings from the home's security system, recordings which prove, in her own words, her intent to vacate the premises just before my client's scheduled return to avoid detection." David pulled out a tablet and, with a few taps, was ready. "To save everyone time," he said, turning the screen toward the officers. "Let's start with this." He pressed play. It was the audio clip I had labeled Exhibit A Mens Rea. Barbara's smug, dismissive voice filled the air. "Perfectly clear. We just have to make sure we're completely out of here by the morning of the 31st. Clean everything up, and he'll never even know we were here." The officers' faces, which had been professionally neutral, now hardened. They looked from the tablet to Barbara, whose face had crumbled. All the bluster, all the arrogance had drained away, leaving behind a sallow, terrified woman. She was speechless. And just when it seemed it couldn't get any worse for her, the front door I had unlocked creaked open further. Her husband, Gary, peered out, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He saw the police, the lawyer, and my stony expression. He cracked instantly. "I'm so sorry," he blurted out, rushing onto the porch. I told her it was a terrible idea. I didn't want any part of this. She made me do it." His pathetic, panicked confession was the final nail in her coffin. Sergeant Miller had heard enough. He took a deliberate step toward Barbara, his demeanor now entirely that of a law enforcement officer about to make an arrest. The shift was absolute. There was no more negotiation, no more de-escalation. "Barbara Clean," he said, his voice flat and official. "You have the right to remain silent." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed in the sudden quiet of the afternoon as Officer Reed led a whimpering, utterly defeated Barbara toward the back of a patrol car. My neighbor Arthur, who had been watching the entire drama unfold from his lawn, caught my eye. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod of approval, a gesture that conveyed more satisfaction than 1,000 words. The Queen had been deposed, not in some stuffy boardroom, but in a humiliating public spectacle on the steps of the very palace she had tried to steal. The aftermath of Barbara's arrest was swift and decisive. With her cuffed and driven away in the back of a squad car, a satisfying silence descended upon the neighborhood, broken only by the whispers of the few neighbors who had witnessed the downfall. Gary was questioned but ultimately not charged, largely due to his immediate cooperation and my assertion that he was more of a coerced accomplice than a co-conspirator. David and I saw no value in prosecuting him. His public humiliation and the implosion of his marriage were punishment enough. He scurried back to their actual house with the haste of a frightened mouse, leaving me to finally, truly, come home. The legal process for Barbara was an open and shut case. Faced with the mountain of digital evidence I had compiled, the hours of video, the server logs, the damning audio of her admitting her plan, her lawyer advised her to plead guilty to a lesser felony charge of criminal trespass and theft. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, a significant fine, mandatory counseling, and, most importantly, was ordered to pay full restitution for all damages and consumed goods. I meticulously calculated the cost of the food she ate, the wine she drank, and the premium scotch she served to her friends. Down to the last coffee bean, David presented the itemized bill to her attorney, a document that itself served as a final, humiliating reminder of her grubby intrusion. I later learned from Arthur that she and Gary were forced to sell their house to cover her legal fees and the restitution. The last I saw of them, they were loading a U-Haul, their faces grim. As for the restitution check, when it arrived, I endorsed it directly over to a local charity that provides housing for the homeless. It seemed the most fitting end for money obtained from such a gross abuse of shelter. But my victory wasn't just about personal justice against one woman. It was about dismantling the toxic system she had created. The HOA board was thrown into absolute chaos. With their president facing a felony charge, an emergency meeting was called in the community clubhouse. I attended with David by my side. The remaining board members, a collection of spineless enablers who had allowed Barbara's reign of terror to persist for years, sat at a long table, looking distinctly uncomfortable. They were expecting me to sue the HOA into oblivion. I had a different goal. David began by laying out the sheer scope of Barbara's abuse of power, focusing on the emergency key bylaw that had been her weapon of choice. He explained that while we had every right to pursue a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the HOA for gross negligence, my client was prepared to be reasonable under certain conditions. I then stood up and addressed the packed room of my fellow homeowners. I told them the whole story, not with anger, but with a calm, factual demeanor. I projected a few key pieces of evidence onto a large screen. A still from the video of Barbara hosting a party on my patio, and the transcript of her phone call bragging about her free vacation. Gasps rippled through the room. People who had been fined for the color of their petunias were now seeing the enforcer of those rules revealed as a common thief. This isn't about me, I concluded. This is about the principle that no one in our community should have the power to violate the sanctity of another's home. This bylaw giving one person access to all of our houses is a security nightmare waiting to happen. It has to go. The enablers on the board folded like cheap suits. A motion was immediately raised from the floor to permanently rescind the emergency key bylaw. It passed unanimously in the ensuing fallout. The entire board was shamed into resigning. An election for a new board was announced. Several people nominated me, but I politely declined. I wasn't a politician. I was a problem solver who had already solved his problem. I did, however, nominate Arthur. The retired professor, initially hesitant, was goaded into accepting by a standing ovation from his neighbors. He went on to lead a new, far more reasonable and transparent HOA, one focused on maintaining the community, not policing it. Weeks later, life had settled into a new, more peaceful normal. The ugly green mailbox Barbara had forced upon me was gone, replaced once again by my sleek black steel one. It felt like a small but significant symbol of my victory. I was sitting on my back patio one evening, the same patio where Barbara had entertained her friends with my scotch, pouring myself a glass of that very same single malt, the bottle now rightfully mine to enjoy. The air was calm, the sun was setting, and the only sounds were the crickets and the distant laughter of children. I thought about the absurdity of it all. Barbara's obsessive desire for a life of luxury she couldn't afford, a life she saw embodied in my home, drove her to commit a crime that ultimately cost her the comfortable life she already had. Her arrogance, her belief in her own petty authority, was her downfall. She underestimated me completely. She saw a quiet tech nerd, not a man whose entire career was built on seeing patterns, gathering data, and patiently waiting for the right moment to act. She thought she was a wolf sneaking into the sheep pen, never realizing the sheepdog was watching from halfway around the world, logging her every move. The whole crazy ordeal reinforced a lesson I'd learned long ago in the digital world. Bullies, whether they're in a boardroom or a subdivision, thrive on intimidation and the assumption that you won't fight back. But when you do, when you stand up with facts, with evidence, and with resolve, their power evaporates like morning mist. They are, at their core, often nothing more than a facade. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. It's proof that sometimes the best security system is a little bit of patience and a whole lot of data. So, tell me in the comments, what's the most outrageous thing your HOA has ever done? And if this story made you cheer for justice, give it a like and share it with someone who needs to know that even the most entitled Karens can be brought down by the right evidence at the right time.